What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my Week 12 top 70 flex rankings, combining the running backs, wide receivers, and the tight ends. If you guys enjoyed the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe. But let's dive right into Tier 1, the locks in your lineup. Got CMC, Jonathan Taylor, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, Puka Nacua, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Trey McBride, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Rashee Rice, and CeeDee Lamb. Regardless of league settings, league size, these guys are all going to be in your starting lineup. Pretty much the same thing with the guys in Tier 2. Derrick Henry, great matchup against the Jets. Rico Dowdle continues to get, a awesome workload week after week. Chase Brown, Samaje Perine did not practice on Wednesday. When Perine does not play, Chase Brown just dominates the usage. So not a great matchup, but I just think the usage is going to be awesome. Then Saquon Barkley, great matchup against the Cowboys, top 5 in points per game allowed to the running back position. Nico Collins playing tonight against the Bills. The Texans are going to be without CJ Stroud, but Nico Collins is actually at his best 2 games with Davis Mills, so I don't think that's like a huge negative or even a negative at all for Nico Collins at this point. Then I've got TreVeyon Henderson, and in my initial running back rankings, I had Henderson and Ramondre Stevenson ranked like back-to-back. I did have TreVeyon ahead of Ramondre, but I was assuming Ramondre would return this week. It does seem like it's trending in that direction, but I have actually separated them a little bit. So I've got TreVeyon in Tier 2. Believe I have Ramondre. Yeah, Ramondre is going to be in Tier 3. So I did separate them. I still think Ramondre is going to get a lot of the goal line work, the between the tackle stuff. But I also just think that TreVeyon should be pulling away in this backfield. And maybe it's like a 55-45 split, a 60-40. But I do think TreVeyon should be leading in this committee here. And with Ramondre out, I mean, he was averaging 24.3 points per game as the starter. Then I've got T. Higgins, potentially with Joe Burrow at quarterback, was a full participant on Wednesday. So there's been some weird stuff, right? Like Lamar was a full participant, then it got, called back and he was actually with the practice squad. So we'll see if it's Burrow. Either way, with no Jamar Chase, I think T. Higgins is going to get peppered with targets. Then I've got George Pickens, Emeka Egbuka, 2 really strong wide receiver options. Kyren Williams has been on a roll, decent matchup against the Buccaneers. James Cook, not a great matchup, but offense still likely to put up points, favorable game script. Devontae Adams coming off a down game, still a great wide receiver 1 play. Chris Olave, absolute target hog, especially with Rashid Shaheed out of the building. Javonte Williams lacking some of that receiving upside, but still strong usage on a very good offense. Brock Bowers, very strong high-end tight end 1. And then George Kittle, the last guy in this tier, back-to-back big games with Brock Purdy now back at quarterback as we saw in Week 11. Now moving into Tier 3, starting it off with Emmanuel Wilson going up against the Vikings. Now it seems like there's actually a chance that Josh Jacobs plays this week. This is obviously under the assumption that Josh Jacobs does not play. And we just saw in Week 11, once Jacobs left that game, Emmanuel Wilson dominated the touches. He had 100% of the opportunities in that backfield. So I think he is a very strong play if Jacobs does miss. Then I've got Bucky Irving. He could return this week, limited on Wednesday with his foot and shoulder injuries. If he does come back in, I don't know if he's going to have the same huge role that he had early on in the season, especially first game back, but I still think he'll have a nice role. Not a great matchup, but he's just such a talented player, receiving upside, touchdown upside, still someone I'd trust in my lineup in his first game back. Then I've got Ramondre, who I mentioned, limited on Wednesday with that toe injury. This is a great matchup here against the Bengals, so I think both of these running backs can be productive. Would not be shocked if Ramondre had at least a few goal line carries and hit in the touchdown department. Then I've got another running back in Woody Marks going up against the Bills. This is a great matchup on paper. Bills second in points per game allowed. Woody Marks, in a game that they were leading for most of it, had a 79% opportunity share in Week 11. So it does feel like he's kind of pulling away in this backfield. Nice potential spot here against Buffalo. Then I've got Michael Pittman, just pretty consistent, strong production coming out of the bye week. Devonta Smith going up against the Cowboys, 3rd in points per game allowed to the wide receiver position. Justin Jefferson, he's been struggling, super talented player, just in a pretty brutal offensive situation right now with J.J. McCarthy at quarterback. Then I've got Jameson Williams. I think things are trending up for JMO. Sam Laporta on IR, Great matchup here against the Giants, sixth in points per game allowed to the wide receiver position. And then in the 2 games with Dan Campbell calling plays, he's had 2 big performances. So I think you got to feel good about playing JMO moving forward. Tedero McMillan up next, also a strong matchup. 49ers, fifth in points per game allowed to the wide receiver position. Week 11, 12 targets, 8 receptions for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns. Finally had like that real signature performance for his rookie season. Stephon Diggs, like the matchup against the Bengals, he's been on a roll coming off a really strong week 11, actually where we saw his routes at a very high level, something that had kind of been lacking earlier on in the season. Then I've got A.J. Brown. I like the matchup. It's just been kind of hit or miss with him throughout this entire season, and honestly, more misses than hits. Then I've got DeAndre Swift going up against the Steelers. Strong usage in week 11, just didn't translate to a ton of fantasy production. Then I've got Ashton Genty. I really like this spot for Genty here. Now, it's not a good matchup, like defense-wise, going up against the Browns, but for Genty, you really just need them to be in competitive game scripts where he can actually rack up a decent amount of volume, specifically on the ground. So they're 3.5-point favorites here. I'm not saying Genty's going to come out and log like a super efficient day, but I think the overall workload is going to be solid. And, that's what kind of sets him up in this area. Also in this tier, a couple more running backs, also in some pretty rough offensive situations. Breece Hall going up against the Ravens, and then Quinshon Judkins going up against the Raiders. I did move up Judkins, I think at least like 1 tier at running back. I think I jumped him over a few other running backs. And kind of like my criticism with Judkins is that he has been very game script dependent, where if they're in the game and it's close or they're leading, then he'll get a really strong role on the ground and he can produce for fantasy. The issue is that they just don't use him on passing downs. And so if they start trailing, his, production, his usage starts to take a dip, and he just straight up hasn't been efficient. Like, he's been under 4 yards per carry in his last 5 games. So just getting work on the ground, you can't even bank on that. The reason why I moved him up is I do think this is a good spot against the Raiders, where this should be a somewhat competitive game against 2 pretty bad teams. So that is why I gave him a boost there. And then the last 2 players in this tier, 2 wide receivers, Zay Flowers, Rome Odunze. These guys have kind of been very different in their production. Zay Flowers has been super steady. He just can't get into the end zone. And then Rome Odunze has been a lot more volatile. He's had some of those super low floor games, but he's also had a decently high weekly ceiling. And then the Steelers allowing the most points per game to the wide receiver position. Now, moving into tier 4, we're going to have Travis Kelce kicking off this tier, and he's just been super productive as of late. 16.7 PPR points per game in his last 6. I have talked about this in different videos. Like, I really thought Xavier Worthy was going to be the clear-cut number 2. Once Rashee Rice was back, I thought Travis Kelce's usage was really going to dip. We saw that early on last year with, Rashee Rice operating as the number 1. Even I think the first game with Rashee Rice back, I think it was a rough Kelce performance, but he's just been super productive. He's stepping up. Xavier Worthy not doing a ton. So got to give Kelce his respect here with this ranking. Then I've got David Montgomery. Dan Campbell came out in one of his press conferences, said that they needed to get David Montgomery more carries. I'm wondering if that's because he knows they're going up against the Giants, where they're likely going to be leading. They're going to have a decent amount of carries out there. I just don't know how you look at this offense and you look at just like how electric Jahmyr Gibbs is, and you're like, you know what we need to do? We need to siphon carries away from Jahmyr Gibbs and give them to David Montgomery. To me, that just doesn't sound all that optimal. So I think the workload's going to be fine this week. Giants 4th in points per game allowed to the running back position. I think Montgomery's a solid play. I just don't know if like whatever usage we get in this game is something that's going to carry over moving forward like rest of season. Then I've got Travis Etienne going up against the Cardinals. It's tough to firmly rank him right now because we just don't know the status of Bashal Tutin. If Tutin is out, then I think we can definitely jump up Travis Etienne, probably at least into like the tier 3 area. I feel like he'd be in that running back mix with like Swift, Genty, Hall, Judkins, those guys. But if Bashal Tutin is fully healthy, now you're looking at a running back in like a potential 50-50 split. Couple more running backs. Aaron Jones going up against the Packers. It's not a good matchup, but Aaron Jones has really just kind of pulled away in this backfield. Since returning from injury, his opportunities have gone from 11 to 17 all the way up to 22 last week. Then for Kenneth Walker, this is tough because like this really could be like the launch pad game for Kenneth Walker. He's coming off a really strong week 11, 16 carries for 67 yards and a touchdown, also had 3 receptions for 64 yards. On paper, this is a really strong matchup against the Titans. They are 8th in points per game allowed to the running back position. Game script wise, like this should be favorable for Kenneth Walker, but I also just don't trust the Seahawks and how they deploy him. Like, if we're looking at his stat line and he had like 15 carries for 60 yards, no receptions, no goal line carries, I wouldn't be shocked because this year has just been super disappointing for Kenneth Walker. So I'd like to think he's going to have a big game here, but I'm certainly a little bit sketched out. Then we've got a run of wide receivers. Wan'Dale Robinson going up against the Lions. Just a pretty high floor weekly play. This team lack weapons. He's going to command volume. Alec Pierce, someone who I've finally given a lot of respect to. He has just been super productive since week 2, 12.6 points per game, despite only scoring 1 touchdown. Like, I think it was last year, he was really hitting in the touchdown department. He would have pretty much like a big play every week. And when you are someone who's winning down the field, like it's kind of crazy. He only has 1 touchdown so far this season. But when you look at his recent games, he's actually commanding targets. So last 4 games, 35 total targets, averaging 14.9 points per game. Just a player who's really kind of emerging and is like a legitimately good wide receiver who will get paid this offseason. Then another guy who's kind of come out of nowhere, Michael Wilson going up against the Jaguars. I talked about this in my wide receiver rankings video. I had Marv ranked in my top 36. I did not have Michael Wilson ranked. I said if Marvin Harrison Jr. misses this week, Michael Wilson is probably going to slot in somewhere in the area where I had Marvin Harrison Jr. And that's what I'm doing this week. So Michael Wilson, week 12, 18 targets, 15 receptions for 185 yards. He's certainly a tough guy to rank because we just saw him in this very unique situation with no Marv. You know, obviously we have no Marv again here in week 12, and he has this monster game. He commands a crazy amount of volume. So you think like he's going to have a pretty solid role. But then we also have to remember, like, this is a player who has pretty much done nothing all season long. Like, he hasn't hit double-digit PPR points outside of his week 11 breakout. So I feel like this is kind of a fair middle ground for a player just like with that type of circumstances around him. And then the last wide receiver here on this run, Jawan Jennings going up against the Panthers. As of right now, I do view him as the wide receiver 1. I still think rest of season Pearsall could outproduce him, but we'll just have to wait and see for Ricky to kind of get back to it. And then the last guy in this tier, Tyler Warren, going up against the Chiefs. Just super consistent production at the tight end position. Now moving into the 5th and final tier, I'll start it off with Bashal Tutin going up against the Cardinals. He was limited on Wednesday with that ankle injury. This kind of sucks for Tutin because it really looked like he was either breaking in at the very least to a very competitive committee with Travis Etienne. But typically when you see like those situations where the rookie is really pushing the veteran for touches and it's getting to like the 50-50 point, typically the rookie does not then bleed opportunities moving forward. Like generally they continue to improve on their role, and it seems like he kind of got robbed of that opportunity with the ankle injury he suffered later in that week 11 game. So hopefully he's good to go this week. Hopefully they give him similar usage. I guess hopefully if you roster Bashal Tutin, which I do in a lot of leagues, both Dynasty and Redraft. But I also just can't be 100% sure he's going to have like a 50-50 split, especially if he's coming into this game a little bit banged up. After Tutin, I've got Alvin Kamara going up against the Falcons. I'm actually coming off a pretty decent game pre-bye week, so week 10. Prior to that, he had been pretty brutal. Still someone who's going to be pretty inefficient on the ground, but the usage should be decent enough. Then I've got Jaylen Warren, a tough guy to rank because he did not practice on Wednesday with that ankle injury. And then even before he suffered the ankle injury, like the usage was kind of odd with him and Kenneth Gainwell. Gainwell was getting a lot more work than we, had kind of come to expect. So if he's coming into this game banged up, Kenneth Gainwell coming off a pretty strong game, especially through the air, like what is the usage going to look like in this matchup against the Bears? Another running back in Zach Charbonnet going up against the Titans. You know, in a perfect world, Kenneth Walker would really dominate the touches here, and Zach Charbonnet would be the clear-cut running back too, but it just doesn't seem like that's what the Seahawks want to do. So in a plus matchup, feels like Charbonnet has to be kind of in this area. Then I've got BTJ going up against the Cardinals, limited Wednesday with that ankle injury. We'll see if he gives it a go. Khalil Shakir going up against the Texans. This is a pretty brutal matchup. Second fewest points per game allowed to the wide receiver position, coming off a really brutal Week 11 game for Shakir. Romeo Doubs, been a pretty steady option. Packers just don't have a ton of options in terms of pass catchers at this point. Then I've got Ricky Pearsall. I could certainly see just having like no interest in playing him after Week 11, 1 reception for 0 yards. This is a player who I still think is very talented. He was very good early on in the season. The routes were still there, 82% route participation. I would not be shocked if he was a much bigger factor in the offense rest of season. DK Metcalf, he's been struggling. I still think he has some of those like super efficient, also getting into the end zone games left in the tank. Tyrone Tracy is going to be my number 63 player. He's in a 50-50 split with Devin Singletary. I just think in this specific matchup against the Lions, where they're big-time underdogs, I think Tracy's like receiving usage is going to be like the more impactful, the more productive role compared to Devin Singletary, who's mixing in near the goal line, getting all the short yardage touches. Another running back in a committee, Bam Knight going up against the Jaguars. Amari DiMercado out for this one, so the committee gets a little bit clearer. Trey Benson did return to practice. I'm not anticipating him playing in this game. And then in the last 5 games, Bam Knight's had 13 opportunities per game. That's totally fine usage when we're getting into this range of the rankings. Then we've just got to run on these tight ends. Jake Ferguson, Dallas Goedert, Juwan Johnson, Hunter Henry, Kyle Pitts. Ferguson, Goddard, just solid like number 3 targets on good offenses. Juwan Johnson, 13.6 points per game in his last 4, scored his first 2 touchdowns in Tyler Shuck's 2 starts. Hunter Henry, he's been brutal, but on paper, this is a great matchup. Bengals allowing the most points per game to the tight end position by 4 full PPR points per game. And then Kyle Pitts, no Michael Penix, no Drake London. He hasn't been great as of late, but like someone needs to catch the ball for the Falcons. And then the last guy here, Kareem Hunt. It does look like Pacheco is going to be back this week, but we've seen Kareem Hunt just like get that goal line roll. He's going to have the touchdown upside in this offense. And if we're taking like any specific chunk of this backfield, this committee, I just think like the goal line roll is probably the most important. So Kareem Hunt is going to close us out here. But that is going to wrap it up for my top 70. If you enjoyed the video, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.